Welcome to the first in the big cyber series here at Softcat. What we'll be talking about today is asset and attack. It'll be a topic that we've got a few people around the room here to specialists in that could talk about as well. Let's start with you, Manning, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi there, my name's Manning. I am a sales engineer from Checkpoint.
Hi, I'm Tom Finch. I'm one of the solution engineering leaders at Wiz.
John Spencer, I'm the pre-sales director at CrowdStrike.
Matt Locke, I'm the technical director for Varonis in the UK.
Great, thank you. And my name's David Pearson. I'm the host today. I work in Softcat's Cyber Assurance Service. And thank you very much for joining us. Given the increased complexity of networks, how can organisations effectively discover and classify their data assets, including those that are residing in shadow IT?
It's a challenge. It's a big challenge. We live in a world where we're putting data in lots of different places. And I think the demand from the business now to adopt different technologies, different platforms, different SaaS applications, different platforms as a service makes it a real challenge for a lot of companies. How do you effectively identify all the data assets that you have? You need to understand where they're stored, ideally. We'll come on to the shadow IT bit in a minute, but being able to understand where you store your data is the first part of the challenge. And it goes back to the adage that IT do not understand data, and nor should they, and nor should they be responsible for it. The business own and manage and understand the value of the information. So I think the first thing that we always talk about is make sure that you're talking to the business, know where they're processing information, know where they want to process information, and then you need to have a holistic view to be able to identify it. We see a lot of organizations struggle with sort of native tools that come with certain data stores to try and tackle a small problem and then realize that they've got data in a whole different set of repositories and then having to then use those native tools as well. And it causes all sorts of problems because you're trying to make platform A and platform B talk the same thing and give the same output, and it's really hard. So we always talk about the sense of being able to have an overarching view that can give you some sort of normalized view of all the information that you hold, regardless of where it sits. So you as a business can then define, this is what's important, this is what's regulatory intellectual property, secret information for us, go and find it wherever it is. And then you need to have platforms, ideally that sit in the cloud, because that's where we're storing a lot of this information. But you need to obviously think about this stuff that's still in data centers because it's not going away anytime soon, regardless of what they tell you. And so therefore you need to then automate that discovery of it. With regards to the shadow IT piece, it's a challenge, and it's been a challenge for years. I think where we are now is most organizations realize that they have to monitor all the activity that happens for all their employees, whether it's surfing a web page or sending an email or uploading or copying information to a certain repository. We've got to identify where all of that flow of information is going and then make a determination about whether it's acceptable to business usage. And if it's not, we need to knock it on the head. And if it is acceptable, then we've got to put that holistic view and make sure that we're giving it the same level of attention as all the other data stores that we typically tackle and think about.
Okay, that's a great response there. So in terms of how would an organisation put a strategy in place there, work towards doing that there? How can they effectively do that? Because it seems quite complex.
It is really complex. How do they put a strategy in place? Well, it comes down to what the business demands. At the end of the day, I think, particularly when you look at things like DevOps has really exploded in the last few years. If you think about how available things like managed and unmanaged, structured information that sits in IaaS, in Blob, in S3, DevOps have the ability to stand up and drop, databases at the drop of a hat. And in most instances, IT don't know what's going on. And I can tell you for a fact that security don't know what's going on. So you need to make sure that you're constantly talking and having that dialogue with the business to understand where they're storing data. And it's not to turn up as big brother and say, what are you doing? You shouldn't be doing this. It's to enable them because they're doing it for a reason that's going to make them more productive, allow the business to grow and expand. But it's about making sure that we as a security outfit can provide the same level of protection for wherever you're standing up these data stores as we do for our traditional collaboration platforms and our file servers, because we're human beings at the end of the day, and human beings make mistake all the time. All of us are susceptible for making the mistakes and being negligent. And the last thing anybody wants is to be negligent and make a mistake and expose something that shouldn't be exposed, or put information in a repository where it shouldn't be sitting. So there has to be some regulation that the business has to inform and has to enforce with the rest of the business. And then, it's about making sure that we can protect and control and look after the data, regardless of where you want to process it, create it. We're not here to be a blocker. Inevitably, there's a reason. We'll get onto the whole cost side of it at some point, I expect. But there needs to be a dialogue with the business, because I don't think that we live in a world now where the business can dictate explicitly where data is stored and where it's created and where it's processed, because new applications, new data stores are being fired up every single day at the moment, and it's a never-ending battle to stay on top of it.
I think you've touched on a really important part there, that the focus of security is essentially to wrap its arms around a business while they're creatively trying to allow that business to grow, and naturally however it is going to grow there. But essentially we've just got to be there to make sure that the arms are there. They can do it in a safe, secure manner as well, providing our expertise and insight into how they can do it securely. In terms of like the assets and attack surface visibility there, where do you John, where do you see that playing a point in like the endpoint security aspect of it and the data that's residing in those endpoints?
And look, from our perspective, and I'm going to state the obvious here, the most important thing is you can only protect what you can see. And getting visibility of that is a really difficult challenge. And the obvious starting point is to go look at your external attack surface. What does that look like externally? What do you have exposed externally? Look, there's many tools out there that enable you to do that. Some of the most common tools, as an example, use a protocol called ZMAP. ZMAP interrogates, but firewalls become very aware of ZMAP and prohibit you scanning kind of as extensively as you would like. So finding your external visibility, then internal visibility. It's I'm trying to understand what the correlation between external and internal resources is as well. IoT, edge devices. Edge devices in particular are kind of a big concern for us. It's the low hanging fruit from an adversary perspective, trying to create impact. They're typically end of life or end of support kind of operating systems. You can't patch them anymore. How do you gain visibility of those? And the Ciscos of the world, the F5, the Citrix NetScaler type devices that sit there on the edge. IoT devices clearly is a concern. And then your SaaS applications. And I think the real challenge with SaaS applications is how do you do discovery on that? The natural thing would be go to your finance department and try and figure out what you're paying for. Yeah. But it's very easy for you and I to get my credit card out and subscribe to an application. Mm-hmm. What's the configuration of that application? What kind of risk and exposure do I have when in that SaaS application? And then I think the other one, and is largely missed, if you look at some of the data that we pulled out from CrowdStrike's Global Threat Report last year, 80% of breaches were due to credential compromise. Each one of those services will use some form of credential. So how do you map those credentials against those services, and how do you pick up malicious activity? So internal, external, the correlation of those internal and external assets, and also how the identities correlate to those assets is incredibly important for organizations to be able to map that and map it very accurately.
What methods are you seeing there that are coming into play there to ultimately make sure that the security measures that are in place there are being mapped accordingly there to the asset, to the risk to the asset as well?
Good question there. So once you've discovered your assets, what you then need to do is kind of do the analysis on what is the operating system, what applications are running on those assets, what known CVEs are exposed, so common vulnerability and exposure against kind of known databases, being able to scan those assets, map that over from the known CVEs to what exposure you have within those assets that you've scanned.
So in terms of the rise of like sophisticated network attacks now, and they're ever evolving, however, the tactics, they tend to stay very similar there. So how do you see it, Manning, there, that we're able to keep an eye on what's going on in the network, how we're able to prevent access to that end user asset, to that device, that asset that holds that juicy information as well.
Yeah, I think obviously the phrase network means many things to many people today. The network could be the data and the information that's transferring over cloud, as well as being in the data center on-prem. I know that we see an enormous amount of challenges in cyber teams for businesses. They don't necessarily have enough people to kind of go through and understand what is happening in their environment. I think one area which can massively help is the realm of automation. And by that, I mean two different things. So firstly, it could be a business sits down and decides what their security practices are going to be on a sort of quarterly, yearly basis, and decide what they need to do and allow computers to do what they're very, very good at, which is to make decisions for them. So you decide at the beginning of the year, this is what our security posture is going to be. And if something new shows up on the network, you've already predefined exactly what access and what control those new devices can have. I think the second side of automation is where you allow security vendors to make choices for you. So we see an enormous amount of data across all different areas of business and industry, and we're able to then apply what we know automatically and turn on features and functions. And the benefit of that is that you're going to be spending less time going in and modifying your policies, modifying your configurations. And as a result of that, what we really would hope is that you're able to create essentially a new virtual headcount in your team.
Do you think that automation sits on the client side, or do you think it sits on the managed service provider side as well for the organisation?
I think that probably depends on a use case. I know that often it can be really difficult for small organisations to know what their security strategy should be. One of the phrases I hear most often from customers, big and small, is what's best practice? And that's just another way of saying, what are other people doing? Because, we want to make sure we get it right. Because there's a liability with making decisions for the business. I think really doesn't matter about the size of organization. People are looking for guidance externally, and there are partners and who can offer that. And there's also technologies that can offer that as well. And there's a lot out there. They've just got to make decisions on what they want to do with it, really.
How would you say, organisations that can best go and secure their networks then? What type of implementations could they utilise to secure their networks, especially with the introduction of and the adoption of cloud?
I think it's good where possible to have a technology that can work across multiple areas of your network infrastructure. So we could talk about virtualization, which could be, cloud, AWS, Azure, that type of cloud, but it could also be on-premise virtualization. And we know there's been a big shift in the type of virtualization tools people have been using recently. I think if you can get technologies that can connect into all of those environments and provide you telemetry and information, whether or not it's a traditional firewall that's doing sort of active blocking of network threats, or some form of NDR product that is identifying things that are going on for you, I think that having something that can bring all of that into a centralized environment, because one of the challenges we all see, and someone's mentioned it already, is that often the tools that come out of the box, native tools that come from providers, don't always work fantastic. But if you are in multiple locations, trying to get the tools from two different places to talk together, and one of the things that a lot of third-party suppliers will do is have tools that can talk to multiple technologies and sort of bring that into simple, easy-to-understand platforms. And I think there's a lot of time saving there as well. So that's one area I think people should really focus on. So yeah.
Great stuff there. So I'm probably going to move a little bit over to Tom there next there from Wiz there, because as organisations there, we've just talked of adopted cloud there. What type of strategies are you seeing in terms of the operating model for people trying to protect their assets? And is there any advice or help that you can give them?
Yeah, sure. So, the cloud fundamentally has changed everything, and it's really affected the operating model, right? And it's no longer just a security challenge, right? I think security needs to be shared across lots of different people within the business in order to make it work. And I see that shifting left a lot of the time. So conversation last week with a group of CISOs around pen testing. They hate paying for pen testing, right? How can you fix that? Shift the problem earlier on in the life cycle, get it to the developers. But you need to change that model in a different way by building security champions in that development team, right? Because if you say to a development team, you need to bake security into an IDE, you need to be hooking into a VCS, they're going to say, no, I don't want to do that. I like to build applications and I like to deliver value that way. So you can put all of the best tools out there in place, but you need to really get that culture ingrained across every area of the business, not just the security team. So it needs to be a team sport. We always talk about security being a team sport. And I think that's ultimately where the operating model really needs to change there.
Have you seen over the last 3 to 5 years then a struggle to adopt security as an approach there within the business as well, or do you see that as something that is finally being grasped in organisations there at a business level as well, to utilise security there for best practice, and also it's not a black hole anymore in terms of a money pit there for where they don't see any return on investment?
I think people are getting better at it. I think the challenge, particularly with cloud, right, is being able to get visibility. Like, I think we were talking earlier on about new things are being brought all the time. So if AWS release a new cool service tomorrow, people are going to pick up and use it. And how do you know that they're using it? Like, security need unconditional visibility into what's being deployed all over the place. And I think we're getting better at that. I think there are solutions out there. There are lots of solutions out there that will show you where you have things across multiple clouds, multiple technologies, multiple architectures. And I think we're starting to get better at it.
In terms of the development of AI into security products there, do you see there's a benefit? This is for everyone around the table there. Is there a benefit there? And what benefits do outweigh the consequences, or the opposite side of that fence there? Because obviously there's threat actors now that are utilising AI and automation, things like that there, to better enhance their capabilities. So there's a little bit of what I see there. It's all we see at the moment in the news and what's being reported is how well they're utilising AI to move forward. Where do we do this within our technology to combat that as well? Because there's already a lack of, or there's a reported lack of education within organisations to combat this already and to get good practice in security measures in there.
And look, from our perspective, we see many organisations go out there and from a security tooling perspective, they go out and they buy what they believe are the best in breed products that are out there, and they install them, and they sit in the SOC centre and they wait for something to flash red or the alarm to go off, and it often doesn't. And there's a real problem in SOC teams is a huge amount of data. If you've got data coming from your firewall, from your route, from your routers, from kind of your network appliances, from your email, security services, what do you do with all that data? How do you bubble it up? And one of the biggest challenges for security teams are kind of chasing their own tail. Mm-hmm. How many false positives do you get during the day? And look, we talk about breakout time in CrowdStrike. 5 years ago, breakout time was 9 hours and 42 minutes. And this is a time it takes from adversity to land and then move laterally in your organization. Last year, that's dramatically dropped down to 62 minutes. And you think, why is that important? It's important for organizations because you don't have a huge window of opportunity to be able to act. Mm-hmm. Okay, A, identify, B, analyze, and then C, kind of remediate the issue that's in hand. So I think from an AI perspective, what we can do, and now we've got all of this data from various different sources, probably dropped into a SIM. How do I interrogate that data and I'll bubble up what's really important and what I need to prioritize within my organization.
Do you see a role there for AI doing some form of threat hunting within that as well, and response actions? Absolutely,
and kind of great example. I've had some customers, they're using ASIM, multiples are available, and I've seen them take a couple of days to be able to write a query.
Yeah.
Secondly, when they run the query, takes probably 48 hours, and I don't exaggerate here, literally 48 hours to get the response. Go back to my statement a few moments ago. If you have 62 minutes as a window of opportunity, that's not good enough. So how about using AI maybe to create some of those queries? You also look at the skill set that we have within SOC team. I think there is we're pretty barren out there in the market in being able to attract cybersecurity professionals into your team. Maybe perhaps AI can lower the bar for an entry point for cybersecurity professionals to come in, leverage AI internally to help them navigate around an environment more easily, create those queries and get better response, and certainly use that for kind of proactive threat hunting. Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, I absolutely, completely agree with everything that you've just covered. I think the way I look at it is that working in security, there's two sides of it. There's the proactive and the reactive side, okay? And we have to be good at both. And I think when you're talking about things like threat hunting, AI absolutely can help massively. I mean, we've been really keen on using AI to run those threat hunting capabilities to understand what the security landscape, what your attack vectors look like at the moment, and have suddenly new ones suddenly appeared, have people being negligent and suddenly exposed information that you're completely unaware of. And to expect an individual to sit there and laboriously go and hunt this stuff and find this stuff, it's never going to happen. So using it in a proactive fashion is really important. And then obviously using things like automation to then get on top of it and revoke it, remediate it is also key. But then when you look at the reactive side of things, you're talking about this reduction of time of how quickly things happen. We've seen a huge uptake, particularly internally, of using it to run the initial investigations. So if something does fire, if something does look like it's, warrants investigation, or it's something that's, abnormal or a deviation or something like that, how do we then make a determination about whether it's something we need to spend time and effort on? And we only have so many people who can do this type of influence activities. So using AI to run that initial investigation piece is absolutely key, because it just reduces the amount of time to get to that point where you have, for example, a risk score. And that risk score can then determine how much time and effort we spend on it. If you look at like a traditional threat, something like ransomware could kick off, it will then fire off all sorts of alerts. If you can have some sort of AI that runs an investigation to say, yes, it looks like there's been a variant of ransomware that's starting to encrypt information, but is that information important to us as a business? Is it, vital, critical customer information that we're actively using all the time? Because the risk score goes way up very, very quickly. Or is it somebody's holidays photos from when they went on holiday to Greece last year? Because really, frankly, we're going to get around to restoring that at some point. But all of that takes time. And when you're talking about this huge reduction in how quickly these things happen now, if you can have some sort of engine running an investigation to then present an analyst with, this is the output of all the work that you might have spent an hour doing yourself, then you can act very, very quickly and you can respond very, very quickly. So I think there are two sides of it that we can utilize AI to help us. It's about speed at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%. I think exactly your point, speed. I think when you're looking at these threats and you see them occurring, how do you go about fixing them? I mean, typically it would take an SRE or whoever hours to be able to look into, what do I need to do? Do I need to patch something? Do I need to change some Terraform code? And being able to leverage AI to accelerate that is hugely valuable. Ultimately, they will look at that code at the end of the day to say, is that something I want to do? That human guided piece, I think, is really important there, but it gives them a start of a 10.
So there is a benefit to this then as well, is the introduction of AI, that automation piece off the back of it to give you that additional head.
Yeah.
Essentially that virtual head within the organisation there. And also, keep you ahead of that curve that we always seem to strive to get ahead of.
But I think the thing with automation used to be a bit of a dirty word, scary word a few years ago. No, we don't want to automate. We want a nice change control window. We want to ensure that we can see everything. And again, it's about building confidence. I think any organisation that goes down a route of implementing automation needs to ask themselves one really key question is, does that automation have the right ingredients to make an informed decision that isn't going to impact the business in a negligent way? And if it does, then we can start to build confidence in it. But it's up to the vendors, to the providers, to the security, the third parties, whoever, to demonstrate that we have the right ingredients to be able to turn on this level of automation.
And you've got to get it right straight away. You can't turn something on and cause outages. And
because you do it wrong once, that's it. We're not doing automation anymore. Yeah. So I think we have to be very transparent how these automations are going to work, but they will free up hours, weeks, years of resource that companies are just crying out for.
In terms of what I'd like to discuss next is how, I think it's for you, Tom, really, this rapid evolution of cloud security there. Where do you see the future of kind of the attack surface reduction piece coming into that? They're trying to reduce that attack surface while rapidly scaling and growing.
That's a really good question. So the problem, particularly with the cloud, is it's a very powerful thing, but it complicates everything so much, right? Because people are running multiple clouds. Like I mentioned, they're running multiple architectures, and there are multiple risk factors that you need to take into consideration, because everything's kind of born with a public IP now. So internet exposure, really easy. But that's not the only thing to think about. Like identities that you mentioned earlier on, it's a key issue that I don't even think the cloud providers understand it fully. Like understanding what should have access to what, how can we prevent it, how can we prevent lateral movement. And we need to bring all of that together to really understand that scale of risk that's occurring, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a point thing that we need to look at. Take Log4j. We're probably all bored of hearing it, right? But we got to mention it at some point, is when things like that drop in these vast scaling environments, how can we prioritize and focus, right? Because large organizations have thousands and thousands of instances of that running. And in order for us to utilize the cloud and keep moving at speed, we need to get that unconditional visibility and understand the risk of what we need to focus on first. And week by week, month by month, we're getting new additional things added into the cloud that just add to that risk profile.
In terms of that risk profile, where do you see like third-party risks playing a concern as well? Like for me, the third-party risk aspect of that supply chain attack there within the cloud infrastructure is becoming more and more prominent. There, it's becoming so much of a concern there that organisations, how are they meant to protect themselves from that type of risk as well?
Yeah, I mean, I split that into two pieces, right? You've got software risk, which, there are lots of ways that you can manage that. You want to keep things patched. You want to get the visibility. So if something does happen, and it does happen, you know exactly where that is. But I think particularly in the cloud, the more complicated area is the identity supply chain, right? The amount of organizations I speak to who have ran many proof of concepts, proof of values with lots of vendors, and they've given them access to, let's say, an identity in Azure to go and do a thing. You've got security, you've got log management, all these great things. And maybe they buy it, maybe they don't. And that just sits in their environment forever. So if one of those third parties does become compromised, they've basically got these keys, these IDs that have access to whatever they want. And it's really hard if you don't have that view across where all those identities are.
Great. How do you see organisations then looking to balance and manage the attack surface and the management of the assets as well? It seems to be, it's becoming extremely costly as well there. So there's that side of it there, but also as well, there's the skilled labour, the skilled workforce as well that have to do this internally in most organisations, and they're expected to there. Where do you see that developing to in the future there? Do you see organisations becoming more reliant on skilled service providers and managed service providers and then outsourcing this?
I know we definitely do. I think, cloud is probably an area where a lot of people in IT feel quite nervous and quite concerned around. If you've ever seen a sort of a spreadsheet of all the different acronyms that are used in cloud, it's a new world, isn't it? And I think we've definitely seen a lot of service providers are starting to set up managed services specifically around cloud is one that we're stepping into. At the moment, that really is just helping customers get into cloud. And by that, I mean cloud infrastructure. I think sometimes when we talk about cloud, and you mentioned there about cloud services, IT teams have ran at that and just signed up to everything because the access of a new SaaS service is how many times have you heard 3 clicks and we're in, right? And I hear that and go, that's great, that's really easy, but it's also 3 clicks and we've got everything as well. And it is really scary. But there are still organizations who are wanting to use cloud infrastructure to make their costs easier, but they are nervous. You mentioned the word like Kubernetes, and it's a very different world of things. So I think service providers, I've seen a massive shift in everybody is now, in terms of partners, are thinking about setting up managed services so they can pull these resources together, because I've been doing this for 20 years and I've definitely seen a reduction in the aptitude of people entering to the IT industry. I don't know if everyone else feels the same, but I'm not sure if it's they're teaching the same types of skills or they're coming in with different things, but I don't think the skills are quite there that they were.
Do you think that's going to subside though? I see with the adoption of AI and like what we just discussed there's got to be a level of AI doing somebody's role, that automation piece as well there. Does that de-skill the workforce within the industry as well? Are we actively doing that by introducing that?
No, I take the opposite view. I actually think it upskills. I think the ability to bring individuals into an organization as cybersecurity professionals, allow them to be able to navigate, allow them to be able to understand, take that mundane day-to-day operation with that automation away. Do we just need to block an identity because something is suspicious? I don't need to raise a ticket for that to happen because it's probably going to be too late at that point.
It sounds silly, as a quick win, but get the basics right.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned AI. I think AI has become really hot, and we've all probably experienced, how do you handle AI security? And I was listening to something recently, and it kind of talks about AI as this big, beautiful structure, but the foundations that sit underneath it are the security foundations that we've always done. And if you don't get those right, then it just sits on the bonk. And I think if you can get things, and I know it's not sexy, but get your compliance scores up, you can start addressing your CISA vulnerabilities that are 2 years old because Russian threat actors are still using them. That will get you a lot of the way there. And I think people are sometimes skipping the basics and trying to start doing very complicated things.
I'd say that's very true there. From what we've seen there within the cyber assurance function at Softcat, there we certainly see customers implementing things at a higher level in terms of, like, for instance, if we did an audit against the CIS framework, you'll find that they've got the implementation group 3 controls, and they've still not got a solid foundation from the implementation group 1 and 2 controls in place. To have that in place, they've got a real poor governance structure is what we may see as well there, which means that they're not utilising the security controls and not maximising what they should be getting out of them as well, and they're expecting that to do everything out of the box for them. There, for me, that screams managed service provider there. I think that's a really important part within this. An organisation needs to understand what they're going to do, what they're capable of as well. So that governance function, that framework, that alignment with is a really important part from me as well. I do believe that. Okay, so we've got a few quick wins from that there. Where do you see kind of strategies developing over the next 3 to 5 years? What's going to play a pivotal role in reducing this? Because it's certainly going to grow. Yeah, it's not going to stop. It's probably going to get a little bit more complex. How can we make this a little bit simpler? How can we still continue to reduce this attack surface?
And I think from my perspective, I don't think we solved the problem from 3 years ago. So we don't have total, I mentioned right at the beginning of this, you can only protect what you can see. I still don't believe there's many organizations out there who have total visibility of their estate, from cloud, their external attack surface, their internal threat, their identities, their SaaS applications. How do we plug that gap? And I think AI can certainly help that. And certainly things like, you look at OT devices, what do most organizations do? You go throw an agent on somewhere and you hope that kind of magic happens in terms of that communications. But on OT, that becomes incredibly difficult, right? It's a lockdown operating system, inability to get an agent on there. You don't necessarily get the visibility. Cloud, another great example. You've got kind of Google, you've got AWS, you've got Azure. There's tooling built in there, but you don't necessarily get the same set of results every single time, or a consistent set of results. So I think, kind of going forward, we need to plug the gap from where we are today and what we've suffered over the last couple of years, to be able to give us that total visibility, not only of our assets, how those assets are intertwined, and the communication flow between those, and the identities that are linked to those assets as well.
We're going right back to the stage that we discussed before, that cybersecurity needs to be wrapped around all your business practices, doesn't it? Essentially, we need to be doing this. It needs to become natural for the organisation to say, we're looking to develop. Have you thought about security? Yeah. It's that aspect in all cases, essentially. Isn't it?
I think one of the things that I think a lot of companies are starting to realise now is that we've talked about this perimeter for years now, and how we define it has always been a little bit of a grey area. I think everyone's coming down to the consensus that the perimeter is your authentication. Okay, and if we live in the world of cloud, and if we're putting information in all these different places all over the internet, and we're reliant so much on being able to get access to things whenever we need, the perimeter is your authorization, your credentials, with all the different layers of factor that you want to put into it. So I think the future for organizations, if they want to stay on top of security and they want to make sure that they've got some level of control, is to just make sure that they understand those identities and they understand those authentications, and they control them, and they manage them, and they watch them and identify them and see the usage of them, because that is really the only way that we're going to be able to stop any type of attack in the future. You talking about 80% of all the attacks last year. IBM brought out reports at the end of January January and looked at all the breaches that happened, and nearly everything was on an authorized account. Lapsus hacked into Samsung through phishing, through social engineering, and then lost those credentials and went to the Russian marketplace and bought a new one within minutes and logged back in again. So that is the crown jewels now, your authentication. So the next 3 to 5 years, the focus has to be on identity. It has to be on authorization, because that's going to give you access to everything. And you talked about the fact that everything is interconnected now on lateral movement. I get access to an S3 bucket, and my identity allows me to traverse and get access to a blob, etc., etc. So it has to come down to that identity piece.
You need to assume initial access essentially in your environment, because social engineering, you can't prevent that. You can't prevent a disgruntled employee going and selling credentials on the black market. Like, there are things that are out of your control. And I think, exactly to your point, you need to assume the initial access has happened to the environment. Don't wait for it to happen. Assume it has happened and lock things down to prevent bad things from happening. Like, we worked with a CISO over in France who was convinced they only used AWS, adamant, only use AWS. And we found clear text cloud keys that were going into Google Cloud with admin privileges, and he had no idea what that was. And I think if you don't have that visibility and you don't assume bad things have already happened, you can't really get a handle on locking it down. But again, I really, really agree with that identity piece.
No, I completely agree as well. And I think there's also this misconception in many customers who say, it's okay, we have MFA. And MFA fatigue is probably the number one tactic for adversaries out there today. And you know, for those listening, what is that? Anyone who uses a duo type kind of configuration, you put a username, you put a password in, you get a push notification to your phone, and it's you have a green tick or a red cross. And if you're smart, you press a red cross if it's not you. But after the 47th attempt,
that afternoon,
at 4 a.m, you either press it by accident, or indeed you just get so frustrated with it, you go press a green tick. And look, we've seen a number of high-profile hacks. Probably in the last 12 months, MFA fatigue has been the number. Having obtained credentials using MFA fatigue or MFA bypass as a mechanism to gain entry. And then, you look at something like Scattered Spider, one of the adversaries that we track, and eCrime Group, actually dropping their own identity provider to create persistence within an organization. There's some incredible tradecraft out there right now.
And you can buy campaigns. You can go onto the dark web and you can buy campaigns. You type in the company, the brand that you're wanting to attack, put in some, I guess, Bitcoins, wait a few minutes, and it's gonna come back out. And so it becomes so easy to target an organization, be so specific about. It's not scattershot attacks. It's super cheap, super easy to target organizations. And we see an enormous amount of that. One area that I think we always think about, you either detect threats and then manually respond to them or automatically respond to them, or you put preventative technologies in place that can automatically stop those attacks. AI is amazing at the moment in its current generation at imitating human behavior. And we have web application automated WAFs in our technology stack. And this idea, which we don't have, but will hopefully come at one day, is this idea that we see, connections coming into web infrastructures we don't like, and you could automatically tar pit them into a honeypot and say, right, you look like you're doing something nefarious. Let's just stick you into a labyrinth you're going to get lost in. And actually making it, the third option that looks like it came to my mind, is this idea of tying it up and making it less financially viable for these organizations to actually make money. And we know how, these threat actors, they get performance reviews and pay increases. And if we can make it less financially viable for them to do things by using these AI tools to do this third type of prevention, I think we could maybe make it slightly harder for them to make money. And that's a really good thing, right?
It is. Yeah. That's that defense in depth, that methodology there to draw out that time. That's the reason we've got that defense in depth methodology, isn't it? To draw that time. If they break through one, they get into another, they've got all that time that they've got to take to get through the different layers to add that
slowing them
into
down really is the key. But I think another thing, and this goes back to one of the layers of protection that I think most financial institutions have fallen back on now, is actually understanding behavior. People talk about AI being able to generate malware. Okay, I think we've seen bits of it. It hasn't really exploded as much as we thought, or maybe we don't know, but it will happen probably. But I think being able to identify threats or breaches or something that looks slightly unusual has to come down to behavior, and it has to have all sorts of different ways of being able to sort of, offset it from typical patterns. And it's not just that individual, it could be teams of individuals or users or peers that you work with. This is why the banks are absolute reliant on looking at what you do day to day on your, and they ring you up, and like they did for me, and said, did you just buy 16 pizzas from North Wales? And you go, no. And they go, right, because you don't know. I don't. Okay, so that's it. And that's what they've fallen back on. And it really has been very effective. So I think identity is key, but then also what you normally do, what your role is, what your privilege or your peers are, the information, the assets that you typically absorb and ingest, that is another way that I think companies are going to stand some chance of being able to tackle it. Because if AI does explode and it generates all these 0 days all the time, we've got no chance of keeping up with it. But we will be able to spot deviations or maybe slight early warning signs that identity is now doing things it doesn't typically do, or it's acting in parallel to what it does, and we're seeing things happening at the same time.
Yeah, we're seeing so much more vulnerabilities creeping out of the woodwork now. There, I think there's just over 27,000 there to about 2/3 of the way through this year. Yeah. That's more than there were in last year and the previous year anyway. There, so in terms of those creeping out of the woodworks, there's a lot more reliance. There's a lot more skill in the exploitation of these as well. Now it's not just a simple, we've found this error there. It's a little bit of cross-site scripting there. There's some really, really technical requirements.
And I'll give you a great example of that, actually. And we had our Falcon event in Vegas in September. We made a big announcement, actually, on when if you went to the FBI website, the FBI were tracking a North Korean group. And to cut a long story short, effectively, the adversary in North Korea was using false identities as part of the interview process. So they were joining a Zoom call. They were doing a deep fake on their face. They were putting false identities and effectively getting a contract from American companies. They join as part of their onboarding, they have a laptop farm, put these laptops in the rack, they'd RDP into these laptops. And you think, well, why would they do that? Actually, what they were doing was they were stealing credit card information from the employer. And what they were doing with that money is they were feeding the North Korean arms program. So incredible story.
Yeah, so it's going back to those traditional methods, isn't it? I think that is something with that process there. You want to see somebody in person.
Yeah.
I know it's probably difficult there if you've got to employ somebody in North Korea there and you're sat in a chair in America or in the UK there, but there's got to be a process within that there where now you get to meet that person. You're introduced to them as well, as opposed to just asking them to flail their arms around on a camera as well. So how are they going to work towards reducing this attack surface then? What is it we're going to be able to do? What advice can we give customers to do that over and above that initial access?
I don't think you can reduce the surface as such, but I think you need to be able to get full visibility of what's out there and as it keeps expanding, right? Because with new AI capabilities being launched, that's just going to increase. And the majority of these are available as a click, 3 clicks, as you mentioned, as a new AI service in the cloud, and you can leverage and use that, and nobody understands it. And you've got new people that are now being brought into the security space, like AI ops teams. I've yet to see one of those in real life, but apparently they're a thing. Visibility and understanding the complexity. I don't think you can stop it. It will keep expanding, but you need to be able to understand the new things that are being brought in and knowing what matters, right? Because you can't do it all. Like it's not possible. If you speak to an organization to say, do you have 0 vulnerabilities in your environment? The answer will always be no. We've got tens of thousands. So it's where do you prioritize your efforts? Because there will always be issues, but you need to know which ones are actually important.
And I'd agree there. I mean, closing your windows, locking your doors. I mean, you can gain visibility of what risk and exposure you have within your organization. To your point, Tom, does that decrease? I don't think it does. I think it stays the same, or potentially even grows as we spin out those new services. And an interesting stat that we pulled up, kind of 5 years ago, 75% of initial breaches was through some form of malware, kind of being emailed, or someone's kind of downloaded it from a website. You fast forward to last year, 75% of initial breaches now are malware free. So what does that mean is these are real people on the end of a keyboard using your tooling to create impact within your organization. Now, typically that final payload is some form of malware where they figured out where they can detonate that. And then you have the best antivirus solution on the planet. That doesn't solve that problem. So now you need endpoint detection and response, or extended kind of detection and response. And that's difficult. Like, how do you kind of understand what's business as usual noise and what's malicious and what's malicious noise? And that's where the real kind of art form is coming in.
I think as well, though, that a lot of companies, when people listening to this will say, well, we have a real challenge because we have to be seen as an enabler. Okay, we've got new people wanting to join the company, new generations of individuals who are so used to SaaS applications and new things that come along and interconnected apps and all of these sorts of things, that I'm afraid that we live in an age where we have to try and apply ourselves to actually stay on top of it. We hear about companies saying, well, if I don't take on this new type of technology, then these people won't join and they'll go and work somewhere else because they're a lot more agile as a company. So there's a happy balance between allowing new types of technologies to work on your network and then putting a valid reason forward about why we're not going to accept these ones. But there has to be a happy medium. We can't live in a world where we just dictate what you can use and that, because people will find that claustrophobic. They feel that they can't be innovative. And so I really feel for people who work in security and have those governance mandates put on them, because they have to stay on top of it. And so I'm afraid that we do have to stay on top of it. We have to look at what's out there. We have to provide a certain level of flexibility, but we have to put guardrails in place. Think about third-party apps. I mean, how many of us have approved an app to get access to your mailbox in your calendar? Yeah, that's fine. I'll approve that. That's no problem. Okay, that just happens carte blanche in most companies. They have no idea. But for the employees, it's great because I can get all these different apps connecting into my Outlook and my Salesforce, and I can show how, and that's great. And there may be valid reasons for that. And if you as a business deem that that's going to make you more productive, then we need to put the controls in place. But I think that we have to adopt, we have to change, we have to learn these new technologies. We can't live 5 years ago where it was all nicely controlled and we understood AD and file servers and all of these traditional things. The world is, the acceleration of cloud and adoption of SaaS is like nothing we've experienced before. We've got to stay on top of it. We've got to move with it. We've got to be agile to attract the right staff to come and work for us. But then I think if we're going to put some sort of blockage in place, we've got to justify it and provide other avenues to allow them to be those creative things that they want to do. So it's a real challenge.
Yeah, the challenge there is allowing the organisation to be creative, grow naturally as well there, and then keep those arms wrapped around it as well. That's a massive struggle that I see moving forward. Okay, there. So. What's the risk, I suppose, associated with not doing that there? How do they get... There's a lot of organisations there that haven't implemented good practice already. Okay, they're already chasing something that is clearly not attainable to them in most cases there with the monetary input that they've got into the security infrastructure. How are they expected to get ahead?
Don't try and boil the ocean. It's probably my first thing. Don't think I've got to solve all of these problems overnight. I think you need to prioritize. You need to prioritize what is important to us as a business. If we were to lose X, could we function? If this was attacked or this was exposed or this risk suddenly appeared in this particular repository, would it stop us as an organization? If it's yes, that's where you focus on and that's where you apply your efforts. And then it's low-hanging fruit, quick wins, but don't try and tackle it all at once because you will be seen to be the security of old, which is not being embraced, not being adopted, not being appreciated, not understood that you're there to protect me. So it comes down to prioritizing and understanding what's the most important asset that I have as a business. And if I was to turn around and say, we've had a breach, and someone said, yeah, but was that okay? Yes, that was fine because we know all about that stuff. And then we could then subsequently work down a risk register of things that are important to us as a business. Then we stand some chance. But also recognize that there are some things that you're never going to get to, and perhaps they're not that important. And if it gets compromised and if it gets breached and overexposed, at least then I've done my due diligence to know that it's a low risk environment. I've ensured that they can't subsequently jump into the high risk environments, and I can sort of let it be carte blanche in terms of what can happen in there.
You've seen that as well, I think, there with the implementation of like zero trust networking and things like that. You can't implement that across your whole estate. That is not where it sits there. That least privilege that we mentioned just before there, but that zero trust there, that's your critical assets. Getting to that point there and understanding what your maybe initially your top 3 critical assets, those services that uphold that pin that business to what they are, essentially is where organisations need to start focusing. And that list might grow there from 3, it might grow to 5, it might grow to 7 over a period of time, but then getting some form of scoring metric in place for these and how they're going to manage them moving forward, that'll then determine on how they need to go and spend their efforts, not just in terms of monetary terms as well there, but also the skilled labour that it's going to require, or the external skilled labour and service provider management that they need to put in place for it as well. So that's a really good subject there that I'm quite fond of there in terms of like managing all this there. In terms of implementing security controls there needs to be that focus, first of all, that strategic thought process in terms of why am I going to implement that security control? What is that benefit? What is it going to give me in terms of benefit, but not just in terms of like the security aspect of it as well there. What is it looking to cover there? If the cost of asset A is £10, we're certainly not going to implement a security control in place of that that's going to cost us £20, for instance. So that quantifiable metric there, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and you've got to appease the supply chain as well. Remember, it's not just about protecting your assets; it's about protecting you as an asset that aren't going to be compromised. That's then going to have an adverse effect on that organisation that you do 30% of your revenue with. Yeah. So it's a fine balance. You need
We're definitely seeing an increase in that. Yeah. So from our perspective, we have tooling that will, does a partner assessment, and we're looking at the people that you're doing business with, and then doing a risk score on how risky they are to do business. And you can be damn sure if you're doing it on them, then they're doing it back on you. Yeah. So this whole awareness, this is awareness of, is it, you talked about tackling the risk and saying, well, okay, we're not going to worry about that. There's going to be some situations where people are going to say, well, we're not going to bother doing business with you because you're actually really risky to our organisation and you don't spend a lot of money with us, so actually we're not going to do business. And I think that's a really interesting thing when you talk about supply chain and understanding your threat portfolio. One of your threats could be that people we trade with. That could be a risk.
I'd like to understand there, I see that kind of a little bit differently, I think, as well. There's that third, if you start employing organisations that are going to give you a security score of other organisations, your third-party suppliers, are they signed up to that same product? And if they're not signed up to that same product, is that score going to be reliable there? How do you gain that consistency across them as well? Because you may have you're going to inevitably get one organisation that's got product A in place, one organisation that's got product B in place. Where's the standardisation between that so that the end user, that client at the end of it there, gets the information that they need?
I think we struggle to be there. I mean, I speak to customers all the time and they say, couldn't we put an automated WAF in front of our API because we want to open access to X, Y, and Z to come in and read data from our environment. So they're putting security tools in place because they don't fully trust their suppliers, right? Or their customers that are going to come in and connect stuff. So I think that is still a quite a difficult technical challenge. I don't think there's that level of automation and that kind of self-checking. I don't think those toolings they don't really exist at the moment.
Right, thank you very much everyone for joining today there. We've covered extensively the asset and attack surface as a topic. There we've learned some new ways there that organisations can have an outlook there on managing the assets there and minimising that attack surface as well as exploring complexity. I want to thank you very much for being a guest there, and I hope everyone watching has enjoyed.
Thank you very much for having us.
Cheers, thank you.